Hi, I'm Chris, this is Rail Focus, and today we're going to be talking about the Class 230, or the D train as it's otherwise known. This was a project what was the brainchild of Adrian Shooter, CBE, who established the Vivarail company in 2014. This was after he spotted an opportunity to extend the life of units that would otherwise have been sent for scrap. They were the D78 stock units, which were operating at the time on the district line. They were just starting to be retired as the S7 stock built by Bombardier began to enter service in about 2013, I think I'm right in saying. So basically he spotted this gap in the market there was at the time, and I guess you could say still is a little bit of an issue with DMU shortages and the lack of availability of adequate DMU stock, basically because the government at the time had a big plan to electrify lots of line, and at the same time it wanted to get rid of the Pacers, which were really unpopular by passengers and lots of other people as well. They weren't really great units. There's a bit of a debate whether or not Pacers save rural lines or not, but I think that's another argument for another day. But the withdrawal of the Pacers, the problems with the electrification program left companies unsure what to buy. Basically, are we going to end up buying lots more electrical multiple units for the UK network, or do we need DMU? So basically companies didn't order very much during that time period, which left, I think for about 2014, I'd say up until about 2019, a real shortage of DMUs, companies looking everywhere for every DMU they could get their hands on, and at the same time withdraw Pacers, which there were hundreds of, so it was a big task. Northern obviously bought in a lot of the Class 195s from CAF, which I think are good units. People say they're not, but yeah, it wasn't a big enough order to kind of replace all the Pacers, because you had Pacers being on GWR, Great Western Railway, and Transport for Wales had a fleet of Pacers as well, so they were all over the place, 100 to kind of replace, whilst at the same time new orders for new DMUs really weren't that forthcoming. So in steps Adrian Shooter. He thinks, right, okay, we can take these D78 stock units, fit them with diesel engines, and use them on little rural or rural lines, which maybe don't justify brand new units. They were designed to be a cheap stopgap measure, much like I guess the Pacers were, but hopefully a little bit more of a quality feel to them than Pacers. Definitely the units that I've been on, particularly the TFW units, are highly spec'd inside, and they are a lot better than Pacers, that's for sure. But the idea was anyway to fit them with engines, seemed simple enough, and then send them out onto rural lines and basically tackle that DMU shortage at the time. In Mr. Shooter's opinion, and I guess in my opinion as well a little bit, the D78 stock units were kind of prime for this sort of conversion. They were built out of aluminium, and the bogies on them at the time of purchase in 2014 were about 15 years old, and I think they had brand new traction motors as well. So 15 years for a bogie and traction motor is not that old at all. The body shells at the time, 35 years old. Sounds quite old, but like I said, they were built out of aluminium, and the bodies were in excellent condition, so it seemed like such a good idea to kind of upcycle these trains. I think people take issue sometimes with reporters or people calling the Class 230s new trains, because obviously they're not, but I think the actual conversion process they've been through does convert them into almost a brand new train itself, or a brand new unit. In total, Vivarail Company purchased 150 driving motors and 300 trailer cars. All of those, I'm pretty sure, well, all of the remaining units which haven't already been sold or sent off to other places are at Long Marston. So if you ever visited Rail Live, you can probably see lots of those dotted around the place. Long Marston is a big site, but 300 trailer cars and 150 driving motors is a lot of vehicles to try and store. So obviously Adrian Shooter had big plans for these and kind of thought that the would be huge orders for the D train or the Class 230, but as we'll discover a little bit later on, things have kind of switched a little bit from the original premise, which was converting them to diesel electric multiple units, to various different power types, I should say. So yeah, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The first prototype was developed and constructed by summer 2016, so only 2 years after the inception of the actual idea. The prototype was tested on Vivarail's own 4-kilometre test track at Long Marston, and then in July 2016, so not very long at all, the Vivarail signed its first passenger service lease deal with West Midlands Combined Authority. That should have seen London Midland operating a 3-car Class 230 prototype on the Coventry to Nuneaton line, but unfortunately shortly after, in December that year, there was a little bit of a fire by Kenilworth and the trial had to be suspended. By the time the investigation had took place and any remedial steps to rectify the cause of the fire were put in place, it was just too late to actually continue that trial, which is a little bit unfortunate. It wasn't a very good start to the Class 230 trial. The first passenger carrying Class 230 operated in June 2017, so you know, almost a year later since it was built, and that was just on a short run between Honeybourne and the Rail Live event, which was being held at Long Marston. So it was a few miles, didn't get up to more than 20 miles an hour. I actually did ride on that shuttle, and it wasn't bad considering it was a bit of a prototype, 230001, and it was only operating on a very rough track, but it was a good indication of how good these units potentially could be eventually. The first proper order for units didn't actually come until summer 2018, so almost 4 years after the initial idea, and that was for London Northwestern Railway, who ordered 3 2-car units, and that would operate on the Marston Vale line between Bedford and Bletchley. Also in 2018, the first battery-powered prototype 230002 was displayed at Rail Live. This was funny. This actually, I also rode on this one. I think if you can tell, I'm a little bit of a fan of the 230 idea, despite its setbacks. But basically, it was a single car unit fitted with a battery rack, and it drove forwards one way with the driver at the front, and then basically a guy with a radio at the back of this single carriage unit talked him back. Basically, it was only going about 5 miles per hour, so there was no kind of issues with regards to safety. But yeah, it was just the first demonstration of the battery powered prototype D train for the Class 230. There was more good news for Vivarail in late 2018 when 5 units were ordered by Keolis Amy on behalf of Transport for Wales to operate the Wales and Borders services. The original intention was for 5 units to enter service in, summer 2019, and they would actually operate on the Wrexham Bidston line, which would be their final home eventually, but they were also intended for use on the Crewe, Chester Shuttle and the Conway Valley line. That was just whilst TfW waited for the order of 197 DMUs to arrive from CAF or CAF. But in the end, obviously none of TfW's Class 230s have entered service yet, but I think it was found early on that with the top speed of 60 miles per hour, Class 230 couldn't keep the time between Crewe and Chester, even with its supposedly good acceleration characteristics, which I've seen demonstrated, and it can accelerate quite quickly. It just couldn't make up for that speed differential, because I'm not sure if it's a 100 miles per hour line between Chester and Crewe, but oh no, it's definitely not, because it's operated by all sorts of different units from 150s to 153s, so I think it's about 75 miles per hour on that route between Chester and Crewe, and it just couldn't make up that time between Chester and Crewe. It's 20 odd minutes. LNR's Class 230s were due to enter service in about towards the end of 2018, but they were delayed until spring 2019, and then unfortunately there's been a few setbacks since then, so the introduction of the units was beset with reliability issues. I think the air filters became an issue and they were getting clogged up with dust and pollen during the summer period, so yeah, the start wasn't very good. I think there is rumours that there's data showing that the units were only achieving 500 miles between technical failure, which obviously isn't very good compared to even a Class 150 or even probably a Pacer. But reliability, I think, has started to improve, but then the pandemic got in the way. Services on the Marston Vale line were suspended, and then they were kind of periodically put back in and then delayed, and then the service was interrupted. And it wasn't until February this year that the service kind of resumed fully, with the 3 trains going into proper service. I spoke to a guard on one of LNR's Class 230s during my visit down to Bedford to ride on one of their Class 230s, and he has said that the reliability of the units has started to improve somewhat, and I haven't seen any stories of the service having to be pulled over the last couple of months since my visit down there, and it should have been by now pretty much an hourly service, other than a little bit of an interruption in the afternoon. I think it goes to 2 hourly for a bit, but I haven't heard any stories, so it does seem that reliability has improved somewhat. As I said before, TfW's units were supposed to enter service in around 2019, but the first unit didn't actually arrive in Wrexham until July 2020 during the pandemic, when it arrived at Wrexham General. It came up under its own power from Long Marston. I think it was... I've forgotten who was operating it now. Somebody was operating it for them, but yeah, it was a Vivarail. Vivarail basically bought it up to begin testing on the Wrexham Bidston line, basically as a little bit of a proof of concept to prove that these units can work on the line. Unfortunately, the pandemic and technical issues has meant that none of Transport for Wales's Class 230s have yet entered service on the Wrexham Bidston line. Obviously, the pandemic's had a big issue. I think there was issues with part supplies and things like that, and then there was issues with driver training, and the testing regime all got set back. So I think the pandemic does have, I know the pandemic is blamed on a lot, but it does have a big part to play in it, because the testing regime I don't think was maybe as thorough as it could have been without the pandemic. Obviously there was driver availability issues, so the actual driver trainers themselves weren't able to get on the units and test them and things like that. So yeah, the pandemic, although it is blamed for a lot, I think in this particular instance can be blamed in a big part for the delay of the Class 230s entering service. However, there have been technical issues identified. TfW haven't said what the technical issues actually are, but yeah, it's just said that there have been technical issues. They were hoping to introduce at least 1 or 2 Class 230s during the May timetable change, and that was supposed to happen, but unfortunately it's been revealed that that won't happen now, and now all TfW are saying is that they will enter service sometime later this year, which is a bit unfortunate. In June 2021, TfW's 230-010 was used as a shuttle between Rail Live and Honeybourne, much like 001 was, and that gave me an opportunity to actually ride on one of the Wrexham Bidston line Class 230s, and I have to say I was impressed. I know I'm a bit of a fan of the Class 230 and I've been supporting their instruction on the Wrexham Bidston line, rightly or wrongly, I hold my hands up, but the inside of them really is exceptional. I think from a passenger's perspective, you've got all the mod cons, you've got toilet, you've got, I think they've got charging on the tables, definitely got plugs, and it will have Wi-Fi. It's also got aircon, which like the 150s don't have, so it will be a little bit more pleasant during the summer. And like I said before, I think it would be fair to call them almost like new units from a passenger perspective. I don't think they'd have, they wouldn't really be able to tell much from a brand new unit and one of these highly spec TfW units. Even LNR's units, which aren't as highly spec as TfW's units, even those I would say are still pretty good. Although I went on TfW's unit in June 2021 on that shuttle, it wasn't until my trip to Bedford to ride on the LNR's Class 230 that I travelled on one in passenger operation and travelling at any sort of speed, so I really got to kind of see and feel and hear the train as it's working as intended basically. And I have to say, even though LNR's units, which differ from TfW's units, and I'll explain a little bit more in a minute, but They do differ, so the engines have to work a little bit harder. I don't think they were that noisy. Probably got up to about 40 or 50 miles per hour top speed in all honesty, but even so I would still prefer L&R's Class 230 over a Class 150 any day, even with the engines working quite hard to get up to speed. That's because London Northwestern Railway's 230s are just straight up the EMUs, so basically the power comes directly from the engines to the traction motors. So as you can imagine, in order to get up to speed, the engines do have to work quite hard. So L&R's units are straight up the EMUs, but TFW's units are slightly different in that they are hybrids. Now these have 4 gensets, much like London Northwestern Railway's units do, but they also have batteries fitted. So what happens is the 4 gensets send power to I think it's 2 battery rafts, which are located, no, it's 4 battery rafts, it's 2 battery rafts on each of the driving motor cars. The 4 gensets are housed in the centre trailer car, and basically they send power to the battery rafts, and power for the traction motors comes from the batteries rather than the gensets. So what that means is, in ordinary use, the engines are just ticking over or just generating, peak torque in order to provide power to the batteries. They're not having to rev up really highly towards 2,000, 3,000 RPM, which is quite high for a diesel engine in regular use. So they can just tick over 1,500, I'd say, to 2,000 most. But what can also happen is, if, let's say, a unit has to rescue another unit and it needs full power, it can also take power from the batteries and the engine simultaneously to give a little bit of a boost. So if the trains do need that boost for whatever reason, outside of its usual passenger duties, then it can actually take power from the batteries and the gensets. So you'd think in theory that Transport for Wales Rail Services units should be a little bit more reliable, but I think there have been technical issues with the engines, but I think also the power delivery system as well. It's not just down to the engine, so not sure quite what's going on there, but hopefully, they will eventually get down to what the issue was and they can be introduced into passenger service this year. Vivarail have had a little bit of good news lately, with obviously the order of Class 484s for the South West Railway services on the Isle of Wight, with the first unit entering service in November 2021. Rather ironically, I think a little bit, the Class 484s are purely electric, so kind of going away from the conversion idea that was originally mooted, and these are taking power from the third rail, which they did originally as D78 stock. So the Class 484 conversion isn't really much of a conversion other than internally. Obviously, I think they get a bit of an upgrade for the passengers, but in regards to the power systems, all of that is pretty much as is, I think. But I think the 484 does prove the adaptability of the D-Train concept, and obviously Vivarail have been experimenting with battery technology and have actually secured a deal with Great Western Railway to test a battery version of the Class 230 on the 4.5 kilometre Greenford branch line. So they'll operate I think it's just a single Class 230, not sure how many cars, probably 3 I think, but that will have just batteries. I know 4.5 kilometres isn't very long, but the whole idea is to test Vivarail's Class 230 battery variant, but it's also to test the rapid charging system that has also been developed by Vivarail. This is something else that Vivarail have been working on alongside the D-Train concept, is how we can actually rapidly charge trains, in a matter of minutes, in order for them to travel upwards of, I think, about 60 to 80 miles I've heard talk of for a battery version. So basically what this will do is it'll test the battery train in passenger service, in full service, backwards and forwards, but it will also test the actual rapid charging system that Vivarail have developed. Now this can be powered from basically the grid, or it can be powered by static batteries. I think one of the ideas is what would happen is old batteries which are no longer suitable for use within the rail vehicles can be actually used as static batteries, and what can happen is these can be topped up slowly via the grid, and then once one of Vivarail's Class 230s approaches the rapid charging system, it can draw that charge from the batteries via, I think, the the idea is third rail chute gear to the batteries in a matter of, I think, 8 minutes, and I think they are trying to get that down, so that is a real rapid charge, especially for a huge battery, which they have. I can't quite remember the kilowatt hours for the batteries, but yeah, you know, they are quite big batteries, so an 8-minute charge is very rapid indeed. So it's probably better to have the power coming from like a static battery, and that way you don't overwhelm like the grid system. So the introduction of the actual Class 230, the original idea for the DEMUs as it was, hasn't gone so straightforwardly as I think they would have hoped, but I think there is still hope yet for the actual Vivarail D-train concept, and I think the battery variants are quite exciting. You might even maybe one day end up with battery variants on the Wrexham Bidston line, perhaps. You know, that's the whole point, is they have options, and Vivarail have also been experimenting with hydrogen fuel cell technology as well to power the unit, so real adaptable units. I think the idea of taking aluminium body shells, which have still got 20 years life left in them, and converting them for use on like branch lines and things like that is still a good idea. Despite the delays to the Class 230, I still very much believe in the D-train concept, and I really hope that the Class 230s are successful on the Wrexham Bidston line, because that is my local line, so that's you know, something I'm eager to see. So hopefully my next video will be on, fingers crossed, I don't want to jinx it, will be on one of Transport for Wales's Class 230s in passenger service on the Wrexham Bidston line. Fingers crossed again for that. If you've liked this video, please do give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing. If you've got any comments, if I've made any errors, please do let me know in the comments, and yeah, I will thank you for those. If I do make any little errors, yeah, I do like to be told about them. But I'm going to leave it there for today. Say until next time, bye bye.